Chapter 46. Time flew by as the lands were hurriedly returned to human hands to stabilize the many markets of the Westerlands, and you soon realized that even your father was buried in his very own portion of the struggle. Given that the lands were originally acquired by House Lannister through the interests of lending the rock's gold to the many houses of the Westerlands, it wondered nobody that just as many houses now showed great interest in buying the lands right back, much to the displeasure of your father. Smaller houses simply didn't have the resources for the work you were currently doing, which was the only reason why they didn't lose their heads for the disrespect of even making such a request. The Lord of the Rock was the most reasonable man in the realm after all. You're sure that using the opportunity to gain favor with the smaller houses while at the same time strengthening them didn't have anything to do with your father's show of patience, or at least that was the position that everyone else in the Rock was taking. You realized that things were genuinely beginning to work out not too long after the Lords of the West began breaching the topic in the open. If even a normal opposition was asking nicely, the future of House Lannister was truly assured. Even if the Crown were to try and force the West into waging war against the Iron Islands now, it could simply be laughed off, despite the message doing so would send to the rest of the realm. The concept of the Westerlands as a nation was quite ridiculous for any sane noble that was calling Westeros his home, but if push came to shove once more, you're sure that your house would have all the strength that's needed to make it actually happen now. Mayhaps you might actually get a happy ending if your work keeps pushing the West in the current direction, especially when looking at the state of the Seven Kingdoms. You can't even see the lately so annoying shadow on your future. The realm's former so very fragile unity was crushed by the efforts of the wildlings and Ironborn, and it was honestly exhilarating to think about all the madness rapidly claiming the continent with so comparatively little effort. It surprised you just how little effort it took to compel the Lords of Westeros to fight against their own long-term interests, so much so that you decided after a moment of thought to give it another try. Though that still left you with the question of where your family could actually benefit from a new spark of chaos. The options were after all quite manifold. But after thinking on it, the eastern provinces of Westeros were pretty much your only valid targets that could provide decent damage, seeing as they were still largely in working order near the Crownlands and loyal to the king. As you narrowed it down to either the Vale or the Stromlands, you couldn't help but wondered if perhaps the Crownlands themselves wouldn't make for the juiciest target in the east, but the thought didn't stick. The Knights of the Vale and the great castles of the Stormlands simply made for far greater obstacles. You can't imagine that the armies of the Rock would ever struggle against the walls of the capital or the keeps surrounding it. Yeah, it's simply better to make sure that the king's forces lose some of their mobility granted by the Vale and House Arryn. It would be nice if you could just send some steel to the hill tribes calling the Vale their home, and House Arryn their enemy, but the chances of failure and the consequences of screwing up were in the end outright unacceptable to you. Instead, you decided to take your little companion and Oracle aside and ask her what she thought about the Vale and its knights. The following conversation was sadly a bit too boring and bland for your taste with how focused she was on their honor, but when you thought back on it a few hours later you supposed that it was still a great place to start, just like you had hoped. Honor made for a great shield against all sorts of threats, but if it's used by someone with a lack of wisdom, it also had the potential to become a weapon. If their sense of honor could be turned against their lord and House Arryn, then you didn't see a way how the foundation of the Vale's strength could possibly remain unharmed. You didn't need a wasteful civil war between the Knights of the Vale after all. It made far more sense to simply focus on diminishing their ability to unite under a single banner for the time being. You were naturally still busy with your current efforts in the Westerlands, thus you didn't have any time to spare on visiting the Vale yourself this time. It meant that you would have to send someone you could trust to make some chaos, namely Marie. Her ability was immensely useful in restoring the land to productivity, but you were sure that you could manage it alone for a while if you sped up the amount of land being reclaimed and leave it to Mother Nature to patch it all up. Despite Marie's many smaller faults, you can be more than sure that everyone near her would begin to see problems everywhere, and no knight or lord would truly fault a pious little girl like her for pointing out the issues that usually remain in the background. Everyone would look bad and unclean when directly compared to a saint after all, and you truly can't find a reason to not use all the assets you currently have at hand. Hence you also decided to make use of your ability for the occasion. You settled on a number of simple necklaces with the glowing star of the seven for Marie to give around. Let's see how much damage some burns can cause for now. Chapter 47. Hey, Marie, I thought of something awesome, but I will need your help to do it. Normal awesome or as army awesome? Both. Why do I even ask anymore? I don't know that either, but you could always just stop questioning what I'm saying. That should help. Sigh, what do you need help with, Azami? I need you to deliver something to the Vale for me. I made these necklaces here for the lords and knights serving under House Aaron. The Vale is on the other side of the continent. Yeah, but you will get some knights to protect you as well, so don't look at me like that, Marie. And why can't those knights deliver the necklaces? Because no one will actually wear them if they're brought by men of House Lannister, obviously, but if they just act as an escort for a little fanatical follower of the Seven like you, then it should still get me the chaos I want. You're quite distracting after all, and no one would question your good intentions. I'm not going to do that. See, that's why you're perfect for it. They are all obsessed with honor and doing the right thing in the Vale, or so I heard. You would be perfect. Come on, Marie, if you play along with my plans I will make it more than up to you. You can wish for whatever you like, and I will do my utmost to make it happen. Fine, if it's really that important to you, I will help you, but don't think that me doing this will be cheap. You were quite happy that she gave so little resistance to your requests, though you supposed that it had more to do with her interest in meeting those oh-so-righteous knights of the mountains rather than your promise of compensation. You were fine with that though, for at least as long as she would help you in spreading chaos across the Vale it would be absolutely worth it. Furthermore, you were sure that you could manage to endure the consequences of her visit, even if she were to bring a number of those knights back to the Rock in an effort to drive you mad. Your normal mental state had long since ceased to be a problem for you after all, and you could surely endure a bit of preaching and screeching from a few knights with unblooded blades as long as your goals were achieved. And there was of course always the option of simply throwing them down the steps if they did manage to insult your house or family enough. Thinking about it, you should probably make it clear that she really shouldn't bring any new companions back to the Rock. It wouldn't do your house any good to split the Vale if it risked that someone with a working mind might grasp the goals behind the work of your father. If the realm learned of the Rock's massive standing army with all its gold to support it, all the enemies of House Lannister would cease their squabbles overnight to band together, and that would get costly awfully quickly. The Westerlands should still have a few more years of preparation time to gather more strength, at least if you didn't draw the attention of the crown too much with your somewhat obvious efforts to destabilize the reign of House Aaron. Considering those facts it became absolutely clear to you that you would need to make sure that no one, truly no one, would actually give the Vale the light of day in the coming months, hence you decided your undertaking would require a new and much greater distraction to keep the realm occupied. And you already had the perfect house to help you with your problem in mind, for like so often throughout the ages, the Riverlands under House Tully was struggling as the realm was falling to infighting. An alliance between Riverrun and the Rock should be quite cheap by now, and the daughters of Lord Tully ought to be the same age as you and your siblings, perhaps a year older at most, and a planned marriage alliance would certainly gain and hold the attention of the crown for quite a few years. Jaime, as young as he was still the heir to the Rock, so he would certainly make for a great match in the eyes of just about every house on the continent. It would of course bring your house in conflict with the Greyjoys, but that wasn't the end of the world when the losses were directly compared to what your house would gain. House Tully wasn't the worst family to marry into either with how focused they were on duty and family. Furthermore, such a marriage proposal would get the blessing of both of your parents, which truly wasn't a given with their vastly differing goals for your three. You were fully aware that playing the game of politics didn't count as one of your strengths, but you still felt like your way of thinking gave you a decent enough plan to strengthen the position of your family. Gaining the Riverlands would allow your house to contain the Starks in the north when the time comes to strike. The Starks wouldn't lose against wildling tribes after all. And should worst come to worst, the castles and men of the Riverlands should at least be able to slow down and harass the Knights of the Vale for a time. It would be such a threat to the capital that you really didn't think it would be a bad move to make as a distraction and contingency plan. Yes, it contained a lot of ifs and shoulds, but that was never something that managed to stop you. Action is better than inaction, and the Ironborn would sooner or later sue for peace with the Targaryens, and the influence of the crown would grow from the victory. You hoped that your father didn't have any plans to marry Jaime off to a useless house like the Tyrells who could only bring numbers to the war, and you genuinely didn't want to see your brother stuck in the fangs of those vipers in the south either. Sometimes the safe choice is also the right choice. Chapter 48. The Riverlands you wished to ally with were often seen as the weakest of the Seven Kingdoms, and depending on the state of the Iron Islands they were so by quite the large margin. Even the Stormlands had their strong castles and mountains to defend them, and the Ironborn themselves lived on islands protected by one of the greatest fleets in the realm. Compared to that, the lands of House Tully had only a bunch of rivers and smaller keeps to seek shelter behind. One could say that if it wasn't for their decently sized armies and extensive will to still protect their homes, that they would have become part of history ages ago. But their keeps could easily be expanded and reinforced with the help of the Westerlands, and in doing so a number of quite experienced and sizable garrison forces would be freed up to strengthen positions wherever needed in the realm. Or when you look at it from another perspective, if the Crown Land, the North, and the Vale all remain loyal to the Targaryens, then the massive garrisons the Riverlands so heavily depend on could join and march united with the royal armies on the Westerlands. It would make for a much greater threat than the slow and prideful giant that is the Reach. Though to your surprise you didn't have much trouble convincing your father of going with the Tullys over the Tyrrells, for as he tells you, he already played with the idea for quite some time, much to your silent embarrassment. What was a bit more problematic was that he didn't plan to approach them for quite some time, and that would obviously mean that you couldn't use it as a distraction for your plan in the Vale, which would simply be too wasteful for you to accept. Any chance that we could create the alliance early, father? You were the one that made the Ironborn go insane. As army, we even sent some ships their way to help them out, and now you want to throw all that effort away? Their armies should be spent by now, father. They won't be of much use if we want to move against the king before there is a victory for him to reap benefits from. I have no wish to move early, my little lion. Is that scheme in the Vale truly worth all the potential problems? Yes, it's great that you believe in yourself, but I don't think it is worth it. Even without additional help, it's questionable if they would truly come forth from their mountains to defend the crown, no matter how long they preach about their honor. The Arryns have enough forces to threaten the future of House Lannister, father. They aren't just a great house, they're a great house. They were kings once, and are even stronger now. They could oppose House Lannister as they did in times past when the Rock was still the center of our very own kingdom. The answer remains the same, as army, and it's not like your mother would be fine with having that come out of nowhere at her. That outcome was not what you were expecting, but you still decided to scrap your plan like your father wished. No one with a working mind would go directly against the Lord of the Rock after all, not even his children. Well, at least there wasn't much that you actually lost with your failure to win him over, except for the time and effort invested into creating the necklaces which you could surely find another use for. There wasn't anything to be genuinely mad about. You guess that you should start catching up to the slowed restoration efforts with Marie for now. Mayhaps it would be better if you left the planning of this kind of stuff to him so as to avoid similar problems in the future. Neither you nor your father were fond of repeated mistakes after all. There was still plenty you could do to push things forward, and you would need to start helping the Ironborn again first, though this time reinforcements in the form of additional ships won't do. The Ironborn would need more time to rebuild just as urgently as the Westerlands needed more time to fully prepare for a drawn-out continent-spanning war. Some things just can't be helped. At least you already had the right tool prepared to deal with the problem. As long as no one knows what destroyed their fleets in the end, there shouldn't really be a problem. Considering how little they had to do since the Ironborn understood not to raid near the Westerlands, they were a wasted asset anyway. And seeing as Westeros was never a nation that placed much focus on sailing, so it should be fine to go the easy way to resolve the matter. It would just inflate the threat the Ironborn were posing in everyone's perception after all. You also thought about helping out the wildlings fighting the Starks up north, but they were simply too dependent on their limited amount of ships to just get south of the wall for you to truly care. Above all else, you still wanted the Arryns dealt with, and helping some ruffians being good at nothing but plundering won't help you with that goal. Thinking about it, that actually wouldn't be such a bad idea. Your problem the last time you thought about it was that you couldn't really get the weapons the mountain clans would need to them in secret. But seeing as the Vale was on the other side of the continent, the logistics that made it so hard would also make it impossible to trace them back to House Lannister. Your father would most likely not give you the equipment you needed to make it work, seeing as he just turned you down, but you were sure that the Tyrrells would unknowingly oblige you once your Krakens ate up their new fleets, though you again supposed that you would have to increase their number for the undertaking. That being said, your not-so-little siblings weren't bound to the sea like their fleshy counterparts, so at least transporting the loot from the shore into the mountains under the cover of night wasn't really a problem. You would even call the plan effortless if it wasn't for the fact that creating your new siblings would take some time. Chapter 49. There was a quite amusing joke that you heard about the Knights of the Vale. It made light of their self-importance and pointed out that even boys with slings and stone could hold the mountain paths of the Vale against any host sent to take them, though it was by now not even seen as insulting anymore. For any castle that is strong enough to actually be called such can be defended by a few boys with slings, even if a proper army would have a far greater chance of winning a proper siege. Thus, your thoughts wandered further into the direction of what would happen if the paths were taken before the defenders had a chance to gather the men needed to defend them. How well would the Knights of the Vale fare against their own fortifications was what you wondered, since you had to change your plans. But sadly you were sure that the mountain clans wouldn't be able to take possession of the paths. That much was clear to you even if one considered the equipment the Tyrell so kindly donated. Perhaps they would find the strength to hold them if you gave them a little additional help to get the conquest of the Vale started. No one could honestly declare that the clans of the Vale didn't fight hard enough to deserve a proper chance at ruling their lands, and considering how much of Westeros was taken by marriage, you were sure that the matter of lineage would work out one way or another. But you still thought for quite a while about how to best solve the problems following the conquest. Finding someone with a decent enough lineage would be simple, but finding someone with the right blood and the ability to rule on top of that would surely be a bit harder, with how there was probably not a single clansman that could read or write. That being said, you didn't care for the Vale. If it burned then it burned, and if it prospered then it prospered. The realm was far too large to care for every province, and if you and the clans had success the Vale would play an even smaller role than it was now. The shadow of a bystander just wasn't important enough to keep you interested. The Vale without House Arryn was nothing, much like how the Westerlands were nothing without House Lannister. The difference was that House Lannister didn't have any cracks in its defenses anymore. Not being weak isn't enough to rule over humans. For every weakness that can be found will and should be exploited to its fullest. It's the fastest and cheapest way to teach the value of the human mind. You wonder if the Arryns of the past even owned the most basic kind of working minds. No matter how costly the undertaking might be, weaknesses like the mountain clans can't be ignored for longer than absolutely necessary. Why they haven't dealt with them yet is beyond you. The costs of having so many enemies behind their defenses, raiding the streets and villages literally each day over the ages, it truly must add up to a stunning and dismaying amount of lost gold, power, and lives of every class. Rebellion is like a sickness that just keeps on giving, and that shouldn't be something new to them or anyone else for that matter. It drains everything that it can, and that with the intelligence, passion, ambition, and even greed of a human. Just how blind are the Arryns that they permitted such a severe sickness to spread over centuries? No, more likely millennia. Since they first set foot on the continent they must have faced the same enemy with the same tactics. And still they hold enough power to threaten the plans of your family if they got their act together. Isolation truly breeds madness. You just couldn't explain it to yourself in any other way. It also didn't make much sense for the Targaryens to be okay with how things stood in the Vale, but you knew what it was that motivated them, and it was disgusting. Instead of seeking more strength for the realm they focused on weakening their vassals to secure the crown despite their massive power that came with the dragons. Who would have thought that dragon riders could be sheep? No wonder the dragons died out if only fleeing sheeps remained from their once great empire. At least the timeline of it all made more sense now. Why would wolves of all beings hesitate to claim Westeros if they had dragons at their back? The few thousand men they gathered over the generations couldn't possibly be worth that much effort and time. You guessed that there was always something twisted about the Targaryens. Even the best one pulled stuff like marrying his sisters. Yes, plural, because one wouldn't be bad enough. You couldn't help but sigh at it all. This world had so much potential and you enjoyed living on it, but sadly it seemed like someone would always find a way to twist and corrupt it given the opportunity. It was one of the sides to humanity that you remained unsatisfied with. You were still sure that everyone could learn some of the simple truths of the world, but keeping that belief was really getting harder as you discovered more and more of humanity's flaws, seemingly shared across worlds. Yet that all changed very little. Your likes and dislikes were meaningless to other people after all, and you learned that most people didn't even understand the basics of your wish for the world to return to the order of the strong. What did matter was that the clans had actually very little competition if the rest of the Vale would remain as passive as they usually were. It sounded like madness. Who would remain passive if the world around them is set aflame? But after thinking a bit more on it, it luckily seemed like the answer to that question was the Lords of the Vale. Mobility like the knowledge of paths through the mountains or simple speed made for an asset that couldn't be overlooked. It was why the troops of the Vale were such a hurdle with all their cavalry, but if they remained in their fortresses their speed would be of little concern. And if timed correctly their speed wouldn't matter once their castles were housing the mountain clans either, for these were, as you remember fondly, castles that could be defended by boys with stones and slings. Chapter 50. Say, Marie, do you want to visit the Vale once things calm down with the Ironborn? As long as it's not a part of your schemes, sure. How did you decide to resolve your problem with them though? You seem awfully cheery. I sent some weapons to the right people, and it would be nice if you wouldn't call my plans schemes all the time. There is nothing wrong with planning things out, you know. Not everyone trusts the gods to have their back like you do, Marie. Well, they should. It would make the world a better place if all that scheming and plotting they tell me about would end. Who knows, perhaps I will try it your way if you would stop keeping secrets like that. I don't have any secrets, Azami, nothing really important, at least. You just admitted that they told you about the plotting that's going on everywhere. And? Marie, I know you struggle sometimes with focusing on the simple stuff, but if you keep that kind of stuff from me, that's what you call a secret. Yeah, but who knows what you would do if I told you. People dying in the thousands would be the best I could hope for with you. You struggled for a few moments to understand Marie's point, and then you struggled some more. In what world did that make any sense? The plans of the great houses would always involve the deaths of their enemies in some way. No house would be willing or could afford to leave their rivals still kicking once they got what they wanted. And with the realm in chaos their plans were by now surely burning with it. There was no way that their remaining plans and projects wouldn't be expanded at any cost to compensate that. You had no idea why Marie would fear your already excessively soft methods over what desperate houses like the Tyrrells would be planning to finish off their enemies now that they have fallen out of favor with the crown. At what point would it hurt comparatively anyone if you knew what they were actually up to? Mayhaps the Tyrrells were seeing the king as an enemy of theirs now, or perhaps they would want to restore the broken trust by marriage pact. You honestly didn't understand what the point of hiding this stuff from you was, and it once more aggravated you to no end that the gods picked a little girl to serve as their messenger. Marie, I know that you can think properly when you feel it's needed, so please be so nice and answer me a little question. I always think, Azami, I'm not as dumb as you believe. We will see. So the question, why do the gods show you all that stuff, Marie? I don't know. Okay, don't make fun of me. I'm not. I want an answer, Marie. Why do the gods show you what you saw if you don't care and never really shared any of it? Each day we mend the damage to the land for the troops. You seem to have more fun playing with plants and actual work than you ever had planning what part to fix next. So why do they show you planning and plotting of all things? Even if you had something against what you saw, you wouldn't have the power to fix or prevent any of it. So what's the point, Marie? I can see that you're still struggling with it, so I will give you my answer. The one that makes the most sense to me. Half of that stuff is meant for me, if you like what I would do with it or not. That can't be right. They would have told me if that was really what they wanted. Is that the best answer you can give me, Marie? I thought you said something about how you weren't as dense as I believed. Fine, you might have a point, a small one, at least until I find the hole in your logic. So what do you want to know so badly? Everything. I want to hear absolutely everything that you couldn't make any sense of. Do you have any idea how much you're asking of me here, Azami? I don't, but I waited long enough for you to open up. I don't care much for schemes or those that waste their time with them, but if the gods showed them to you, I will have to know them, Marie. Sure, but now I have a question for you. How am I supposed to properly describe something that, as you said, I don't understand? Counter question, why is that my problem? What? If the gods want it, then you will certainly find a way, yes? They most likely trusted you to sooner or later open up on your own. I'm sure that they can find a way to make it happen if you ask nicely enough now, Marie. I really don't want to. Why is that so important to you now? Didn't you say you found a way to deal with the Vale or whatever you were focused on? The war that I wanted was delayed by quite a bit, so I have a lot of time on my hands to make it short, and seeing as you also have the time, I saw no reason not to finally deal with the whole situation. You could have said something sooner, Azami. That's true, but you could have opened your mouth when you didn't have mountains of stuff to catch up to if you had a bit more trust in me. I'm still only doing this because the gods want it, at least if you're right. Thinking about it all, did you know that my war would be delayed, Marie? Sorry, Azami, I can't talk anymore. I've got a lot of stuff to write down for you. See you tomorrow. That's fine, the answer to my question can wait till tomorrow, my trusty companion. Uck.